Okay, good morning. First of all, it's great to follow Amanda Zamora, whom I really respect and admire and worked with at the Washington Post. And I'd never seen Ben perform before, but he puts on a great show, and I'm not sure I'll be quite as exciting because I'm going to be reading from this, but thank you all for being here this morning. It's great to be with such an incredible crowd of inspired people who are committed to media, committed to changing the way the world around them works. 2 years ago, I left a 35-year career in newspapers and co-founded a startup. It wasn't exactly the kind of startup that many of you are probably involved with. It was a financial startup premised on what probably seemed to a lot of my legacy media colleagues to be a rather contrary idea, that media and media technology companies could be great businesses. I'm sure I don't have to tell all of you that. It's not a happily accepted truth in the legacy media world that we're in an unprecedented period of profound change in how people engage with, produce, share, consume, and depend on media. I'm gonna have to put my glasses on, sorry. This is where I demonstrate that I'm actually a slightly different generation than some of the people who came before me. I recently did a sort of unscientific mashup of some data I found online between Verizon Wireless, the Motley Fool, and the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I concluded that the average American household now spends more on mobile phones, internet access, and cable television than it spends on eating out, apparel and clothing, buying or leasing cars, or on health insurance. To put that another way, the staple of our time is information, whether in the form of news, weather or sports, or entertainment and gaming, or digital community. This isn't limited to the United States, obviously. There's an exhilarating global transformation afoot. So I got together with a brilliant guy whom I know, Sasha Vucinic, whom many of you may know, and whom all of you should hero worship for what he did for independent media and journalism in many of the most difficult places in the world. And together he and I launched a small firm a couple years ago to back media and media tech companies that are heading to the ramparts to lead this revolution. Our company, North Base Media, now has investments in half a dozen countries and is scouting for more. The founders of these companies share our ideals, and I think share the ideals of many of you here in this room. They're running some of the fastest growing and most successful media startups in Taiwan, the Philippines, and here in Argentina. We've backed technology companies in the US and Europe that have found ways to deliver content to people who can't afford data plans. We've found companies that have found smart pathways to collect revenue from media users in markets around the world. And we're incredibly optimistic with what we're seeing. From our experience traveling the world, meeting media entrepreneurs and hearing their ideas, from seeing what works and what doesn't, we've identified some trends that Mariano thought perhaps I should share. So I'm gonna go through a few right now, and I'm not sure all of them will surprise you. I think this is a pretty sophisticated audience, but I think in the interest of being comprehensive a little bit, I'll run through a list of 5 big trends, which I think are really the foundations of good digital media businesses and worth discussing. And I'll end with one short lesson that I think is vital. So first of all, and I think this is rather obvious to this crowd, given I'm just looking around and to the extent I can see through the lights, I see everybody looking on their phones. The most important trend of our time, obviously, is that everything has to be mobile. And everything has to be social, but everything has to be mobile. There are 1.8 billion smartphones in the world. That means there's about 5 billion to go. Many people will first experience non-radio, non-TV media over phones. Most of those people who are just discovering media for the first time on phones have no brand loyalties. They haven't been reading newspapers. They haven't been reading magazines. All of them have communities they want to share with. I know this isn't new. In 2011, when Amanda and I were still at the Washington Post, we hired a new IT guy named Shailesh Prakash, and went to lunch with him and a guy named Raju Narasetti, who was then one of my deputies and is, as many of you may know, an incredibly smart and adaptive guy. Shailesh had come from Sears.com, e-commerce, and as you may know also, e-commerce is a great radar for digital trends because people really do like to shop. And listening to Shailesh over lunch that day, it became clear to us that we had to switch our strategy, and we started talking back in 2011 about how to make our newsroom mobile first. We'd already started pushing social incredibly hard. The Post early on had started something that was briefly big called the Washington Post Social Reader on Facebook. Then the master gnomes at Facebook headquarters, Algo shrank Social Reader into practically nothing. But suffice it to say that we deeply understood that the power of social to put our readers' networks to work building our audience. We also saw that people were going to access their social feeds over their phones, and their news, and their video. We pioneered an idea of a short, punchy video news roundup, which we called 59 seconds, aimed at mobile and social sharing, 59 seconds being just under a minute until the advertising department puts a 15-second pre-roll in front of it. But the idea works. In fact, one of our invested companies, something called the News Lens in Taiwan now, is very successful with a daily video they call 77 seconds. It covers hot issues and news of the day. So mobile and social, I think that's the basic framework of any successful digital media business today. Second is the mix of aggregation, filtering, and personalization of content. Again, the Washington Post social reader, which I just mentioned, morphed into something subsequently called Trove, which is an engine for finding and creating streams of relevant content to readers. I've seen now a ton of these things coming up with different apps and approaches to curate and create streams of content. Each has a special feature. The late lamented Circa liked to say it atomized news, gathering articles into bite-sized chunks. Flipboard puts material into preset universe of content on a nice looking package on your tablet or phone. Nuzzle tells you what your social media network has found most interesting. Shuffle uses a kind of gamified machine learning like Trove to produce a package of content that you might find interesting. Worms, if you haven't seen Worms, I don't fully get it. It seems to have offbeat news I don't care about, but it's worth looking at. There's something called Bullet News in the UK that is a good filter of major news from the mainstream. There are short summaries that people do in push emails like The Skim, or more valuable newsletters, I think, like Quartz and Politico. So this idea that that you can aggregate and personalize news for your audience is hugely important. Aggregation is appealing because it lets you put other people's content to work, building your audience. It can be done honorably, or it can be done pirate style, the way Huffington Post used to do it. There are three key benefits of aggregation, obviously. It gives a site more content, a fresh, up to the nanosecond feel, without requiring more content creation. It lets you offer readers a view of the world through your prism, taking advantage of your worldview or subject expertise, and I think that's really actually very important to dwell on for a second. You know, one of the things that is most critical for success in digital media today is to know who you are and to be and to really focus on what it is that you think you are delivering for an audience and what it is you think that audience wants. If you've successfully done that, the audience will start to trust you to filter the content for them, and so if you start aggregating in a way that brings content to them that they think is valuable, you can enjoy some success. Personalization of aggregation, which is a sort of subset of that, allows you to engage readers better and longer. If they feel like you're able to actually know what they like, I mentioned a minute ago this thing Shuffle, which I don't know if you've used this app, but it gives you choices of do you like this kind of article or not like this kind of article, and in the Tinder-like swipe gesture, you're conveying to it information it is able to use to aggregate much more personalized news to you in the future, and I think it leads to a much more engaged user experience. Okay, the next big trend is the notion that your audience is also a prime source of content, and Amanda really got at this. There were the usual signals this was coming. People love to write comments on articles or add photos or videos on platforms from which they could share them. Media companies, as usual, were a little slow to recognize this. People want to be part of the sites that they like. Media brands can be very powerful and attractive, and I think even more so than some of the social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook. You can imagine if a newspaper site, for example, has a user-generated photo gallery and invites its users to send in photos on a theme of the day, and then allows them to post it in this gallery, and then when they post it in the gallery, they share it with their friends on Facebook. It's more powerful by far to say to your friends, you know, Marcus just shared a photo on the Washington Post than it is to say to your friends, Marcus just shared a photo on Facebook. They're a lot more likely to come see how you got into the Washington Post universe. There are a lot of interesting examples of people contributing content to build out news sites. Here in Argentina, I think somewhere in this room, but I can't see through the lights, is El Meme, which helps users learn how to craft content, and they built a whole social mobile viral news feed out of contributions from their audience. In Europe, one of the fastest growing sports sites is something called 90 Min, the length of a football match. They have a network of contributors around the world who use the company's library of images and videos and access to certain content, and a CMS to produce a fantastic stream of football news, and they've grown incredibly rapidly. Again, putting the audience to work, building their audience, because when you post something on 90 Min, you immediately tell all your friends, hey, I've got something on this feed. It's no different in some ways from the streaming video game platforms like Twitch, or one that we've just been looking at in Europe called Hitbox. Fourth, and directly related to that in the trends, you can't separate technology anymore from your product. Your platform defines your product and the experience that your audience has with it. You need to develop platforms that let people create, curate, aggregate, share, and even monetize content. You all know by now, and I'm sure you'll hear more from Melissa Bell, who I think is here, what Vox Media has done with its CMS Chorus, which is tailored to simplify the work content creators do and ensure the fastest, neatest, best tailored content for various Vox audiences. Sites that want a lot of interaction with their audiences, including audience content creation, have to build technology that accomplishes it. Sites that want to aggregate content that's relevant to readers or a subset of readers will have to create technology that makes it possible for them to do that. Finally, the thing I believe sort of underlies a lot of the conversations we have, and again, we're acting as investors, both with some money from other media companies and from other investors, financial investors. We look a lot at what is the business model. You know, how are you going to be sustainable in the long run? It's not enough to just be producing really great content, because at some point you run out of gas and then the whole enterprise grinds to a halt. So metrics and monetization are sort of the final trend we are seeing. We can call it M squared, metrics and monetization. They're becoming pretty much inseparable. It should be obvious at this point, but it's very hard to monetize what you can't measure. This goes to all areas of the media business. In editorial, if you're spending money creating content, you want to know that it works. You want to know who produces content that connects with readers and has impact. You want to know what works on social media, not simply what's being shared, but what's driving click-through. You want to know where to spend limited editorial resources. There's a whole lot of products like that, like Parsley and Chartbeat, and there's newcomers emerging all over right now. Distribution and reach is important. Most good media companies know who they're trying to reach. This is important if your media, as media increasingly looks to subscription models. If you want to get people to pay for your content, you need to be giving them something they'll want to pay for. There are signals in reader behavior that you can draw from the data that tell you what readers may be likely to pay for content. Again, we're invested in a company called Piano Media, which has an increasingly smart data analytics department, and this, again, is something that we're seeing in country after country, people looking at data in order to understand how they can best make a business out of their product. And of course, finally, there's advertising. Advertising has always been driven by deep knowledge about the audience. Company that I know the founder of that I find really interesting in New York is called Open Slate. It's part of Outrigger Media. The guy who started it is Mike Henry, a former colleague of mine from the Wall Street Journal. And what they've done is they've done an incredible data mining of all of the audiences of YouTube channels, and an advertiser can come to them and say, hey, we just want to reach women in their 30s who are having kids and might want to buy diapers, or men in their 30s who are having kids and might want to buy diapers. And they know enough about all the demographics of all the YouTube channels that they can cobble together a great advertising buy that says, buy the following 18 channels that you've never heard of before, and it's going to cost you way less than if you went out and tried to buy advertising on a traditional commercial television network in the US. There's so many different ways to monetize now that, I think everybody who's building a site needs to think about what is the business future of this site. One other thing just sort of popped into my mind earlier today is a trend that I hadn't sort of thought through, but I think is also really important to think about, that should be self-evident in the technology world where we've seen technology accelerate everything else. Technology, as it accelerates development, also accelerates the decline of things. And we have to get used to the idea that things are ephemeral. In other words, that they don't go on forever. So it may be that you start a site, a media site, serving an audience, and it may not last forever. You might start something, as I'm sure people are doing right now in the US, just to cover the 2016 presidential elections. You might cite, we're invested in a company called News Deeply, which started off by doing a website called Syria Deeply, just looking at the conflict in Syria, because the founder felt like nobody was paying enough attention to this. There was no one place to go to get all the authoritative information on Syria. Their second site, which happily had a rather brief life was Ebola deeply, because at that time people were deeply concerned about Ebola. And I think for media, even media as businesses, you have to get used to the idea that you may start something, it may grow, it may succeed, and it may fade. And the critical thing to be a successful media company, and this is a little bit what Vox does, and again, Melissa can tell you more about it, but you have to have a successful media company, you have to have the capacity to handle, to be really smart about IT, and that means, you know, content management system, it means audience experience, and you have to be smart about user experience, you have to be smart about advertising and distribution and social media. That's sort of the bedrock of a media company. And then you can launch different products and they can come and they can go, or they may come, they may stay. But that, I think that ephemerality, the short-livedness of products is something that's going to be with us oddly for a while. Finally, the lesson from what we've been seeing at North Base Media is something I was sort of getting at a minute ago, and that is if you want to succeed in this exciting and turbulent time, you really have to be sharply focused on what it is you're doing. You really have to know exactly what audience you're trying to serve, and they have to know who you are and what they can expect from you. And you can't be muddled about it at all. You have to have a laser sharp understanding of how big is this market I'm trying to serve. If you're thinking of it as a business especially, you know, what is the potential opportunity here? Is it large enough to generate revenues to support whatever it is I'm doing? And if I'm not so concerned about the revenues at the beginning, you know, am I going to be able to get enough people working here to achieve whatever mission I've set out for myself at this enterprise? So those are sort of some things we've been picking up around the world. I'll be around later too, and I'd be happy to talk further. And other than that, thank you, and hope to see you all soon.